Okay, so what I've got here is a sample app in App Inventor that uses the clock timer. So this is a request from the last session I did a couple of days ago where people wanted to know how to use the clock. So in this, over here and make sure you can all see it. So in this app, what we have is two buttons, a start button and a reset button, a label, and a clock. So this is just going to be a simple timer app. And I'm going to make that a little bit smaller so you can see the clock down here. So the clock is found under sensors, clock, and the other components are from the user interface drawer. So just the two buttons and a label. So I've resized things to make them a little bit bigger so you can see. So it's going to be a simple countdown timer. So when you add a clock component, you've got only 3 properties. So timer always fires. I usually just leave that on all the time. So I leave that checked. Timer enabled, I'm going to leave that unchecked, which means that the timer is not going to fire until I tell it to. And I'm going to do that in code. Timer interval, you tell it how many milliseconds you wait for the timer to go off. So in this case, I want this to be a countdown timer. So I want it to go off once every second. So 1,000 milliseconds is a second. And so what we're going to do is have this go off every second. So if I go to my blocks, these are the blocks for this. All right, let me just admit people waiting to get in. Okay, so these are the complete blocks for this countdown timer. So I've got the 2 buttons. So when the start button is clicked, what I've got it happening is I press it when it says start, and then I'm going to change the text to say pause. And pause would then, if I hit it when it says pause, it will pause it. If I hit start, it will start it. So when I start, so inside the start button .click, I have an if then else block. So if the start button text says start, it means that I haven't started my timer. So I'm going to enable it. So this is where we set the clock 1 timer enabled to true. So that turns it on. It's almost like turning on the switch. And then I'm changing the text to say pause. And then if it says pause, which would be the else situation, if they press pause, I want to turn off the timer, and I want to make the text say start again. So this is just going to kind of toggle back and forth. What happens is once I've enabled the timer, that turns on the timer. So in my case, it's going to go off every second or 1,000 milliseconds. And so it will come into this block, the clock 1 timer. Okay, you can go ahead and leave and try to come back. Let's see if I've got. Okay, so the clock 1 timer, what's going to happen is I want it to subtract 1 from the time. So I'm starting at 60 seconds and I'm going to count down. So I'm going to, my counter is in label 1. So I'm subtracting 1 from what's in label 1 text. Then I'm checking. If it's 0, I'm going to stop the timer. So when it gets down to 0, I want to stop it. And then I've got a second button, a reset button. And in this case, if I hit reset, I'm going to both pause the timer and reset my clock to 60. Okay, so that might be it. If you didn't connect your computer to the audio, then you would need to do that. Okay, so this is the complete app for a simple countdown timer. I have this the emulator turned on. Can people see my emulator? Okay, so if I go ahead and start this, so I hit start and it will start to count down. If I hit pause, it's going to pause it. So it's not going to count down anymore. So it won't go into the clock 1 timer. If I hit reset, it goes back to 60. And then so I can pause, start, pause, start. Whoop, pause again. And we can just let that count down. But essentially, this is the way a timer works. If I wanted to speed up the timer, I could go back to my designer and change the timer interval. So I change this to 500, it's going to go faster. So let me do this again, start. So see how it's going much faster? So this is going every half a second. So it's going to fire off every half a second. And I should get down to 0 quicker, and then I can see that it stops at 0. Okay, that's a good question. The text in the label is a string. Okay, so it stopped at 0, so we know that that part works, so I can reset it. So one comment was that label 1 text is a string. How can you subtract from it? This is a special property of App Inventor where you can actually use labels interchangeably as text and as really kind of a storage place for numbers. And so you can still do math on labels, the text of labels, and it will behave just like math numbers. You could do this, with a variable and do the subtraction with a variable, but because labels have that property in App Inventor, this is particular to App Inventor, not to other programming languages. You can go ahead and use that, and I tend to use that as if I'm using it for a simple counter or something like that, I would just do it directly in the label. Do we have any other questions about the clock timer? Sure. Yep. So with the clock timer, you can do anything in here. So I could, I could say, set reset button background color, to something different. So I could do like, make a color, and I could say, make this a random. So this is just as an example. From 1 to 255. Actually 0. So if I'll move these out of the way, we could do something like that, so that if I start it, it's changing the color in this case once a second. So literally you can do anything in here in the clock 1 timer, and you can set the timer to be, if you want it to be every 5 seconds, you can do 5,000 for the timer interval. If you want to have kind of different things going on at different intervals, you should add multiple clock components, and they'll each have their own dot timer blocks. That I could put this back here too. I could put all this code back here and it would do all of it. And then we have the question, how do you compare time? That's a good question. So are you wanting to compare time like from a certain time of day or something? Because in effect, with the clock timer, we're comparing time for every 5 seconds. So I'm saying, since the last time I did this, has 5 seconds gone by? Okay, so I mean, like I want to record current time in a TinyDB and compare it with tomorrow. If the time is the same for tomorrow and today, then make a label visible. Okay. So what you can do is in the clock component, so this is a little tricky, but you can do it. You can say clock1.now, which is the current time. And then what you can do is, so like, let's say I go to designer and I add a TinyDB. And then over here, so say I do TinyDB store the value, and I'm going to save the current time, and I give it a tag of time saved. So then what you can do is so you want to actually compare, is it, so like if I say something at 2 o'clock today, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, I want to be able to tell, right? So it's not just a date, but it's a time. Okay. So yeah, so you'd actually then say, what you'd say is add the hours of this value. Time saved. And if the tag is not there, I would just give it, I would probably just give it today's. So if the time saved isn't there, I would just use the current time. And then what you can say is, oh, so we're at, oh, sorry, I've already got that. Add hours. And then if I want to add 24 hours. So if I take yesterday's time at 2 o'clock, add 24 hours, I should get today's current time. And then I could say if I say, okay, take current time minus the time I've saved, which supposedly would be yesterday, and I believe if you say if it's greater than 0, it should work. So you could do if it's, go to math and do if this is greater than 0. You can tell if more than 24 hours has passed. So you'd have to, it depends on what you're trying to do, but if in this case, if I am trying to tell if 24 hours have passed, I save, so I use some mechanism to store it. So I've saved it at some point using store value here. So say I did that yesterday at 2 o'clock, and then I compare the current time to yesterday's time with 24 hours added. And if the difference is greater than 0, it means that more than 24 hours has passed. Okay, so that's one way to do it. There's a few different ways to do it, but that's kind of one way I'm thinking of. Okay, XX is asking, in a mole mash kind of game, can you do something like if 3 moles have been touched, display you win? Sure, you can. So what you do there is have a counter that each time you touch a mole, you add 1 to the counter, and then you just test if the counter is equal 3. And then you can display you win. Yeah, the current time on the mobile device. So it'll be like the system time. There's no real limit. I mean, obviously you don't want to have too many components, period, in your app. Yeah, I know. I've seen people that have had like 10. Yeah, it all depends on what you want to do. So if you have all these different intervals, and sometimes people have them where, you know, they have one to display a splash screen, and then they disable it, and then they have a second one for a game. You know, you could have it in multiple situations. No real limit. So we are doing CloudDB, but we're first going over Clock. So we're just doing a quick thing on clocks before we get to CloudDB. What about the date? What do you mean, what about the date? Are you trying to compare dates? So that's an easier one. So you can say, you know, format date. So if I do format the date, it will print or convert this to, in this case, you know, month, day, year. So like, in this case, it would be JUL 1/5/2020. But you could change this to be, you know, MMDD YY, or I know I'm American, so I do it in that way. So you could do it that way, day, month, year. So, and then you could just compare to whether they're the same or not. So the count, are you talking about the counter, the timer? It shows an error. So what kind of error are you getting? The mole mash counter. All right, I'll do a quick, and then I want to move on to CloudDB. So if I do mole mash, where I have a canvas and a sprite, and the canvas is fill parent, and so say my image sprite is my mole. Then I could go over here and say when I've touched the image sprite, and I could have some sort of a counter, and I'd set it to 0. And whenever I touch it, I would then say set counter to counter +1. So from here, I'd say counter and +1. And then I could then have an if. And I probably would just say, you know, greater than or equal to. So if I would say, you know, if it's greater than or equal to 3, and then you could have some sort of a message, you win. Format date is a string, yes. So that's that question. Please show designer for this. or for the countdown for this one. So this is just a simple canvas with an image sprite on it. And so if you're doing something like mole mash and you're just testing if it gets touched, what would you like me to explain about the image sprite? Oh, an image sprite is, so if I've got, I can set a picture, so I can upload a file. So let's see if I can find my mole. I've got an image of a mole. So if I'm playing mole mash, there's my mole. And you can do things like you can move it. You can, you know, in this case, I'm testing whether or not the user touches the mole. And if it touches it 3 times, they win. Okay, I'm going to go, since we're about halfway through, I'm going to go on to CloudDB. So I've got a little presentation here, which I'm going to present. Okay, so CloudDB is App Inventor's database in the cloud where you can store and pass information between devices within an app. CloudDB lets you store and retrieve data in the cloud. For instance, one player can store their score in the cloud, and then any other players in the game would get notified of their new score. You find CloudDB in the storage drawer of the palette. It's similar to TinyDB, but it saves the information in the cloud instead of on the device. So TinyDB is local storage on your phone or tablet. So this would be something like you'd want to save, you could save your high score for your game, but say you then wanted to share your high score and play against your friends. So TinyDB would be for yourself privately, and then you'd use CloudDB if you wanted to compare or share information with your friends. Within App Inventor, there's 3 different kinds of storage. So variables allow you to store information while you're running the app. So you can create variables inside of an app, you can store the information, you can change the information and access it. So for instance, you'd initialize a global variable X, you can set it to values, you can get the value, and that's about it, right? So when you run it, when you run your app, you can access the variable, but once you close your app down, the contents of that variable are gone. With TinyDB, you can store the information on your phone or tablet using the block TinyDB store value. Then to retrieve that information, use TinyDB get value. And then if you were to say close your app and open it up again, you'd be able to retrieve that information. The example being, if you're playing a game and you have a high score, you save the high score in TinyDB, you close the app, you come back tomorrow, your high score is still there. The third type is CloudDB. And in this case, it's very similar blocks. There's a store value and a get value. So you can store the information. So say you store your high score to the cloud using store value. You can also check what your high score is using get value. The other big thing and the big difference is this data changed event. So that means that anyone else playing the app, so it can be, you know, you can have 10 different friends all playing the app in different locations. The minute one person updates it with their high score, all the other apps get notified of that information. So it's immediate information that's shared between different users of the app. This is just to give you kind of a visual of how you might play a game and update it. So in this case, we've got it's called the 2-button game. So we've got 2 buttons, and player 1's on the left, and they're just tapping the player 1 button as many times as they can. The one on the right is tapping player 2 as many times as they can. And so what happens is when player 1 taps, it increases the score by 1, and then it goes up into the cloud, and then that gets sent to player 2. Likewise, when player 2 does it, their score gets updated and also updated on player 1's phone or tablet. So very immediately or almost immediately, you can share information between multiple people all using the same app. It is very similar to Firebase. The reason that we introduced CloudDB was that Firebase is a Google, it's a Google product, and there was talk at one point about Google stopping support for Firebase. So to prevent that and having a whole bunch of people all over the world using App Inventor and using Firebase, and suddenly Firebase disappearing because of Google, App Inventor decided, let's make our own database that does pretty much the same thing, but we can maintain it and we don't have to worry about it going away. So it's almost exactly the same. The one thing is you cannot, Firebase, you're able to log into a Firebase portal and look at your data on the web as well as in your app. With CloudDB, the only way to access it is through App Inventor. These are the 4 blocks that are available. So again, store value stores information. You give it a tag and a value. So tag is an identifier or a name. It's like a giving a name to a variable, right? You have to give it a name so you know what to call it to get the information. So that there's the tag, but then the actual value being stored is different. Get value says, hey, CloudDB, what's the value of this tag currently? So very often, if you start up a new app, you want to figure out what's the current situation. So what are the current, could be, if I'm playing a game, what are the current scores of all the players? So you'd ask CloudDB for that information, and then the gold block got value. Once CloudDB returns the value, so realizing that you're actually, going out to the internet to get that information, it might be a time lag of, a few seconds. Once CloudDB has that information, it sends it back to you, and it tells you, the tag and the value, so you can check that you've got the right tag, and then you can grab that value. And then, as I mentioned before, this data changed event is whenever anyone using the app updates or stores something in CloudDB, everyone gets notified. So everyone's app data change gets triggered. So this is real-time information, and you can share it quickly. And the most useful situation for that is a game where you want to update, things that are happening on each other's screens. Okay, so here's kind of a scenario. In this one, it's, say we want to make a user chat, like a forum situation in CloudDB. So in this case, I've made a variable called forum that's going to be a list. So I'm just going to have a list of messages that people are putting in the forum. So I've just made it as an empty list. So when I start the app using screen1 initialize, I'm going to say to CloudDB, hey, can you give me the latest updates on the forum? Give me all the messages anyone's ever sent on the forum. I happen to call my tag health forum, so say I'm making a forum for a health app. If there's nothing in the forum, it will just return an empty list, which is fine. But otherwise, it should give me a list of all the messages so far. Okay, so what happens is I ask CloudDB to give me the value. Once it's got the value, it returns it. This is a good practice, is to put an if statement in there, an if block, and to check, when I get this is actually a bug on my part, this should be tag. If the tag is equal to health forum, then set my variable forum to get value. Okay, so first I check the tag, and if it's equal to health forum, then I'm gonna take what's in the cloud and put it in my local variable. If at any point, so say I have some sort of a button that the users can enter a new message in the forum and then press the button to store it. So what I will do then is use the store value to then update what's in the cloud with my local forum variable. And then the data changed gets triggered so that, so say I'm a person over here in New Zealand and I add something to the forum, but I've got friends in the US that are also using my app. They're going to get this data changed event to be triggered, and so they can update the information on their app. Again, I've got a bug here. This should be tag. If tag is equal to health forum, then update the local value. And as I put here, note that this code is the exact same as the gut value. So very often, you want to do the exact same thing, whether it be an instant update or you're actually asking CloudDB to give you some information. But either way, you want to do the same thing. So very often it's just copying and pasting that code. When you're testing something using CloudDB, because generally the AI2 companion is for a single device, the better way to do this is to build the APK using the QR code and then download it on multiple devices. So if you're testing this within a team of people working on your app, you can download it on multiple devices, and then you can check, if I update on my app, does my teammate get updated on their app? Okay. The other thing is to make sure you're using the same CloudDB. So one thing you don't want to do is to create an app and then send your friend your AIA file. They open it on their machine and using their Gmail account or their code.appinventor account. What happens is whenever you share a project with someone, we regenerate the token. So each person will get their own token. So if you want to share between users, what you have to do is use the shared token, and the only way you're going to get that is if you actually package the app by building it and sharing it that way. And that way the token won't change. But you can notice, like if you shared the AIA file with the friend, he or she opens it, it will get opened. They'll have a different token here because it's just automatically generated when you open a project. Okay, and I think that's all I've got here. So let me just, I've got another, so I've got a couple of examples. So here's one with CloudDB. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions here. Let me just say, right, so can I use CloudDB for a sign in or sign up screen? Yes, you can. So in that case, what you would do is you could have like a username. A username and a password probably would be the best way. And then what you could do is use the username as a tag and look for that username in CloudDB. And then maybe the password could be the value. So you could do something like that. Okay, so let me just go through this. So this is, here's pretty much what I was just explaining before. In this case, it's a health forum, which is a list. If you're trying to do a high score, you'd have something like, my high score, and I might set it to 0, and then, when I play a game and I end the game, you'd store the value, which would be your high score. You want to give it a tag that will tell you, so this could be my high score as the tag. And then, you'd want to be testing when the data is changed. Same thing as here. In this case, this was my thing. These should both be tag. You'd probably say, if the tag is equal to my high score, and you might then say, set high score to the value. So say, Johnny plays and he gets a new high score, he stores it in CloudDB, and I'm sitting over here and I'm playing the game too, and the data changed event will be triggered, and then it'll be my high score, but it will actually be Johnny's high score because he's the new high scorer, and then I could then grab that information, and now I have the high score locally in my app. Let's see, difference. Can you show me, the score? Can I store audio in CloudDB? You can store audio, which would be, I know you can store images, so I think you probably can. Let me do a media sound. Yeah, I think you could probably do a sound and do the source. So what you would do is, now there is limitations to the size of what you can store in CloudDB. And I'm not exactly sure what that limit is, but I wouldn't go too crazy with audio. But so like if you're thinking, oh, I'm gonna make a song, a big long song and store it, and all my friends are gonna store songs, it's not gonna be possible. But you can, if you've got kind of short clips or something, I'm pretty sure you can do something like, a value to store could be a sound one source, and it would store that. Obviously you say like my sound. Make sure you set your tag appropriately. Let's see. If I am storing a list under a tag in CloudDB, how can we update a particular record in that list under that tag? Good question. So say I've got this forum list, and so say maybe what I've done is, if somebody's updating, so say they hit, I'm using button 1 as my way to update my local list. So say this could be forum, and say for some reason you'd have some sort of code to do. So say it's like the 4th item in the list, and the replacement is, so say I happen to write something, this is a new message, I updated in my local thing, and then I would update it on CloudDB. So in that case, you'd want to update the entire list. One thing you can do, so like for instance, let me go to, this is another example, a simple chat app. So in this case, I've got to, type a message to share. You type the message here, and I have a submit button. And then there is an append value to list. So in this case, I'm not allowing people to update messages, but I'm adding to a list of messages. So if you're using a list in CloudDB, a simple thing to do is append value to list chat. But in this case, when I get the value back, notice I have a local chat list variable, which is the full value. So I really update the entire list each time. which is what you're going to have to do. So if you've got a very, very long list, just realize that, you know, there'll be some sort of a time lag with CloudDB updating it and then sending it out. All right, let's see. I used CloudDB to send information from my phone to another phone, which I used to control speed of a motor, but this transmission was very delayed. How can I improve this? There's no real way to improve it. It's really based on the fact that CloudDB sits on a server at MIT in Massachusetts in the US. And so, you know, if you're in India and you're going all the way out to the US and back, it will be delayed. It shouldn't be more than, you know, a few seconds, but it's still going to be delayed. If you're trying to do something, you know, local to another phone, you might use Bluetooth instead of CloudDB. What does socket exception mean? Is this an error from CloudDB? And if it is, I believe the socket exception error means that you've lost a connection with CloudDB and you usually have to restart the app. Can I, as the maker of the app, view the scores of every player anywhere? Yes, you can, but you'd have to write the code to do that. So, you know, you could do something like every time anyone that wants to use your app has to log in, and you can store their usernames. And then what you can then do is, there's a few different ways you could do it, where you would have every user's name be a tag, and then their score would be the value. And then in CloudDB, there's a thing called get tag list. This will give you the tag, every single tag in your database. So if you've got, you know, 100 people using your app, you'll get a list back. So when you ask for that, CloudDB will send you the tag list. So this would return a list of all the tags. And so then what you could do then is, if each tag was a username, you could then go through and, so you do something like, for each, so remember that this is a list, the value is a list. For each item in the list, so this could be a user. And then what you do is say, for each user, get the value, and the tag would be the user. And then the value could be, you know, if I can't find the user, I'll just return to 0. So what that would do is go out and ask for every single user's score. And then of course you'd have to have a gut value that would do something with that information, but you can definitely do that. Let's see, if I put a CloudDB on a screen, will it be able to use the information on it on another screen? You'd have to use a separate CloudDB on the second screen, and you'd have to do a store value and a get value. So you'd still have to, even though you're in the same app, it's just like TinyDB. You'd have to store it in one screen and then get it in the second screen, but you can use it. Is there a component that functions like, if this thing is done, display text on different screens? So if I'm getting what you're thinking correctly, so say I press a button on screen 1, then I want to display something on screen 2. So the only thing that's going to happen is it's not going to display it on screen 2 until you open screen 2. So what you'd have to do in that case, if you're just trying to do between screens in your app, I would use TinyDB, because you don't care about sending it to the cloud. So you could use TinyDB, and then when you get to screen 2, you can ask TinyDB what that value is, and then do whatever you want to do on screen 2. My sign in and sign up screen needs a lot of information. How do I store them? So in that case, I would do something like use a list. So for instance, I could do something like store value. And so say it's a whole bunch of information about a particular user. So this is going to be my, user 100, and I could, I could add a bunch of items here. And so, for instance, I could say, this is, and you'd have to decide what's the order of the information you want. And so say, her location is USA. I could say her high score is, 300. Her age could be 11, and and what does she do for a living? She's a student or something. And this is just actual information. You'd probably use text boxes or whatever to get this information. But if you have a whole bunch of information to store, give it a tag, and then you'd have to put things in a list. How to make the game to be able to update every player's score, any specific blocks or advice. Every player's score. So for instance, in the CloudDB thing that I gave you, this one, I had player 1 score and player 2 score. And so I would send them to each other, and then within the game or within the app, when I got player score update, I would update player 1 score update. I would update it, and player 2 score update in the data changed event, I would update it. So, if you get an update for a particular player, you could just update that player score within the app. And, it's probably somewhere that you've got a label that says player 1 score. You could update that. If I'm using audio to store, what is the least size of audio file? That I can't tell you what that is. I don't know what the least size is. I would say go ahead and try it and see if it will. I probably wouldn't want to go, more than a few hundred kilobytes. The other place is to ask in our community, or on the Slack channel is another place. But if you ask on the community site about CloudDB, the maximum or minimum sizes of files that you can store, that's a good place to ask that. Can I save a multi-level list of lists in CloudDB? Yes, definitely. And that's a good way if you say, you've got a list of users. So the example I gave here would be one user, but I might have multiple users. So I might do a list, with this user, and then I might have a second user, which is, Billy, different users. So this would be a list of lists, and then each list in itself has information, in this case, about a particular user. Let's see, in my app, I created many tags, but hardly any of them are appearing in the tag list. What do I do? If they're not appearing in the tag list, it means that it did not store them in CloudDB. So I would check that you're actually storing them. So make sure that you've got a store value for that tag. And a way to test it is, if you know that if you're running the companion, so whether you're using an emulator or you're using your phone, if you go to a store value and right click and choose do it, it will automatically do that so in this case, I just stored the value user 100 as a tag with this list of lists. So to test something like that, go ahead and just go in and do right click and store value, and then you should be able to get a data changed event and should update it. The other thing that's nice in CloudDB is there's a clear tag. So if you wanted to, if I then said, oh, wait a minute, I made a mistake, I want to clear that out of my database, I can do that one. And now it's erased it. So that's a way to clear out your database. Is there any limit on the number of get value method calls from any screen? No, it's unlimited. Just realize that, you know, the more you're asking CloudDB to send you information, you have to wait for all that information. So if you ask it 1,000 times, you got to wait for CloudDB to return 1,000 pieces of information. But so in the case like this, where I've got many tags, you know, this could potentially be, you know, 100 different users, and I'm asking CloudDB, send me each one separately. But you just have to make sure that, you know, your app can handle that, and generally you just have to wait. It's not going to be instantaneous. It might be a couple of seconds before all that information gets returned. Okay, we'll get to TinyDB in a minute about the sharing between screens. How to update? How to update what? What are we asking to update? I have text boxes and buttons. Also, can you send me the link of the new updated emulator, because I have it on another computer. I need it on this one too. So the new emulator is, I believe I've sent this on Slack, but let me do that after the fact. If I have a sign-in system, can I use his or her email to be the tag? Yes. I believe it's just a text field, so you can use the email to be the tag. Yes, you can. Firebase? I don't know about Firebase, whether you can store audio in Firebase. You'd have to check on their website. How do you clear all tags? So if you want to clear all the tags, you do something similar to this. So I'd say, give me all the tags. So I'd first say, get the tag list. Then in the event get tag list, what you could do is something like this. Clear the tag, and I would say get user. So this will loop through the whole list of tags and clear each one. So this code will clear out your entire database. How to update to send information to all the users? CloudDB. Right, so essentially a store value paired with a data changed will update all the users. So when you store the value, it goes to CloudDB, and as long as you have a data changed event in your app, any user that's currently logged in will get updated with the information. I did that, but none of them cleared. So I think you're the one that's having trouble storing values. So there's got to be something wrong with your CloudDB. For storing files to database, you need an extension to store to Firebase storage. So Firebase is under our experimental over here. So there is a Firebase component, so you don't need an extension. If you're getting socket exception, I would close out of AI Companion. I would refresh my App Inventor screen, and I would try it again. The other thing you can do is build your app using the build instead of the AI companion. Download it onto your phone or tablet. Make sure you have a good Wi-Fi connection. If your phone or tablet doesn't have a Wi-Fi connection, that could also be slowing it down. And then try it again. As I said, the server is in Massachusetts in the US, so there is going to be a time lag and there is a timeout. Okay, so this is just building it. So that might be a way to overcome that. So someone asked about TinyDB, and let me just go to this. So if I had a TinyDB as well, TinyDB is going to store things locally. So if I said, you know, in here I say store value, and I've got and say I happen to, you know, it might be my high score. Then I'm going to add a screen 2. And in screen 2, what I can say is when screen 2 initializes, oops, I'd have to add a TinyDB here. So every place you want to share information, you need either TinyDB or CloudDB. And then, but then when it initializes, I can say get the value. Whoop, I could say, so say I've got so say I want also to know about the high score. So I could say set high score to, and the tag has to be exactly the same. So let me just go back and check it. Data, I called it data. So if I go to screen 2, data, and you want to use the same type. So because I'm using a number, if the tag's not there, I'm just going to use a 0 again. So that would be the way to pass information between screen 1 and screen 2 using TinyDB. Store it in 1, and then in the second screen, you just get the value. To use store value and data change, is there any specific block to use to send to all users any device? So data change does that. You don't have to do anything special. You store a value, and as long as you have a data changed, everyone gets it. And I have used the store value method with a list. Later, can App Inventor add append value to list be used on that tag? Yes. As long as you are using a list, and you can use the append value to list, and it will append anything new onto that list that you've already got. Will this show you the information you stored on screen 1? You're asking about this example I just did. And if I have a high score on screen 1, I store the value in TinyDB. I come to screen 2, and I say get the value. This variable high score now will have the same value that screen 1 had. So that's how that happens. Okay, do we have any other questions? Because we're a bit over our hour. You cannot, you actually have to use what's called a shared token. And if you were to email me, I can send you one. So basically one of our dev team guys, he generates a bunch of these shared tokens.
Awesome.
So yeah, so my thing is, I'll just put in the chat, Carl Lang at MIT. So email me and I'll just send it to you. Some special characters in there. Put that token in both the client and the server app. Well, as long as you use the TinyDB, you store the tag and get it in the second one. So as long as you don't use TinyDB, they won't affect each other. So say I remove this, I don't store anything. So if I've got high score is 3 and over on screen 2, I take this out and I've got this as 0. Screen 2, high score will be 0. And screen 1, it will be 3. They don't communicate unless you do it through TinyDB. Yeah, so the purpose of TinyDB is things like that to share. So if you want to share between screens, store it from one screen and get it from the other screen, and they will be shared. Okay, so on my screen over here on the left, basically in this case, because these are my components, button, CloudDB, sound, and TinyDB, your any components are going to match. Say you've got 5 buttons and you want to have the same code for all of them, you could use any component. So you say when any button gets clicked, do this. That's the way to do any component. Let's see, can I use the same token generated in 2 apps created? No, again, same thing. If you need to share a CloudDB between 2 different apps, so the instance Diamond had mentioned, he's got a client and a server app working together. You'd have to use the same tokens. So if you email me, I can send you a token. And that one you could put into both apps and then they would share the same CloudDB. Otherwise, it works the same way. It generates a new one when you create a new project. All right, I think we've got all the questions answered. If I wasn't able to answer your questions, go to the Slack channel. Definitely keep asking your questions there. There's lots of people on there. We've gotten more and more people helping us answer questions. And as well, the community site, community.appinventor.mit.edu. We have people there who are also ready and willing to help. And those people are very technical and they know a lot about App Inventor, so it's a really good place to go. Okay, good luck everyone with your apps this week. I hope you're all making some progress and we look forward to seeing them at the end of the week. So thanks for joining us. And I will maybe see you later in the week at another Zoom.